how to coach anyone about anything. You know, I used to think my opinion and my advice wasn't worth shit, and then I bought this book. There are a lot of videos on my channel warning you about the ways in which university can, to be frank, ruin your life forever. And there are very few, perhaps zero, videos on my channel talking about the advantages of university, what you can get out of it positively. Now, why would that be? There are many, many videos on this channel warning you about the ways in which the decision to have a career in hardcore pornography could ruin your life, could have long-term consequences for you, unforeseen long-term consequences. You should think through carefully. There are very few, perhaps zero, videos on my channel talking about the wonderful positive aspects of being a porn star. I think there's a natural tendency to deal with the warning and warding side of the equation. I cannot count how many videos I have made low-key bragging about the size of my penis and that I'm amazing in bed, talking about open relationships, polyamory, the fact that I am in an open relationship now and always have been. But the general tone of those videos is, again, it's so warning and warding. It's so much dealing with unforeseen negative consequences, things you should be, worst case scenarios you should be prepared for. There have been long-term fans of the channel. I remember one woman in particular. She had seen every single video on my channel over like an 8-year period. And she was shocked. She wrote to me one day, "What? You're in an open relationship? You're one of these polyamory people?" Yeah, well, guess what? I eat a vegan diet. I am a member of the vegan movement. I'm also the world's harshest critic of veganism and the vegan movement. I'm the world's harshest critic of fitness advice and diet advice that's peddled within the vegan movement. Naturally, whether I'm talking about human sexuality or higher education, you are going to get a pretty stern set of warnings and reasonably profound reflections on how this decision you make at one moment in your life could have knock-on consequences for the type of person you are, for who you really are 5 years from now, that you have to take tremendously seriously. Okay, but there are disadvantages. For example, think of the thousands of gorgeous, brilliant female members of my audience who are passing up their opportunity to send me nude selfies on Instagram because they don't even realize. No, in this case, what we're dealing with is the more serious side effect. There's a long-term fan of my channel. I'm not going to use his name, and I'm not going to use any details about his life here. I think I should mention that he is in the United Kingdom, because it would be different if we were talking about Australia or I don't know, South Africa or anywhere else in the world. It'd be different if we were talking about communist China, for sure. But there's a long-term viewer of my channel, and he wrote to me talking about his own resolution to really be an autodidact, to learn on his own, to teach himself, to study on his own independently, and never go to university. And then he was very surprised by the advice I gave him in return. So he says that he taught himself Latin. Again, I don't think this is too personal. I can quote this. He says, quote, "I was able to learn enough Latin in 6 months to read the entire book of Genesis fluently." Even if he became disillusioned with it. He became disillusioned with the study of Latin itself, not with the Bible. It's not that he was a religious person. Okay, so this is my direct responses. All right, sorry, I should go on. He also says, he quote, "I was focused enough to get through all of Plato's dialogues in just under a month." So that'd be reading Plato in English, not in Greek, definitely not in Latin. Okay, here's my reply. Nobody was grading you. You think your Latin is pretty good, but you didn't have an expert evaluating your work. You think your understanding of Plato is pretty good, but you didn't have an expert evaluating your work. Okay? You think you can write a decent essay about Latin or about Plato, etc. But you weren't writing essays to spec and being graded on them, being evaluated on them on a fixed schedule. The schedule aspect here, right? You don't just wake up anytime you want to. You don't just finish your work and turn in your essay anytime you want. It's different. Okay, I think I can just continue reading this because there's nothing about his personal life revealed here. I say, "The quality of writing in these emails you've sent me is high. I'm not flattering you needlessly, but yes, overall, you do seem to be at a decent level of English language composition. And most of the people who email me write at a lower level of the quality of prose in their compositions. However, writing essays and exams on someone else's schedule and living up to their standards again and again is quite another thing. The quality, this is fine, I'll include this too. The quality of university education in England is better than Canada. In subjects such as Latin and Plato, the quality of education you'd have in England is much, much better than anything I could have here. And those professors might appreciate you as a mature student with a mature perspective if you go back to university now, as opposed to the average teenager. So there may be a lot of positive things in your situation that you are ignoring or taking for granted. So skipping ahead here, I say further, even if your professor is an idiot, you learn to live up to the expectations of an idiot. You learn to write, you learn to write to spec. So there's a turn of art, write to spec, write to specification for a boss who is an idiot. That might be the most important part of your university education of all. You learn to live and work on someone else's schedule instead of waking up whenever you want to, wherever you want to, and working and studying for your own pleasure at your own pace, writing for your own satisfaction. There's an interesting digression here, and I talk about how different my own life would be if I'd had access to the British system of education instead of the Canadian. So I'll say, I'll read this part out, and then I'll return to the major theme of this video. Look, I'll be blunt. You have no idea how much better my whole life would be if I'd had British citizenship, dual citizenship, or some kind of legal right to live, work, and study in England, as some of my brothers do, my half-brothers do, but I do not. It was impossible for me to study any of the things I cared about in Canada, whereas there were world-class university programs in these subjects in England. So guess what? I do not get to become a Pali scholar because I'm Canadian. Pali is this ancient dead language from India. It's less famous than Sanskrit. It is fundamentally similar to Sanskrit. You could say it is a sister to Sanskrit. Guess what? I don't get to be a Chinese scholar because I'm Canadian. I won't digress into that here. Both Melissa and I, we never imagined it's such a mainstream subject. It's modern Chinese language and Chinese politics would be impossible for us to study. It's been impossible. It has been genuinely impossible. So I don't get to be a Chinese scholar because I'm Canadian. Guess what? I don't get to be a stand-up comedian because I'm Canadian. I can't access any options of the USA either. I'm not just cut off from options of the United Kingdom. So I can't study politics. I can't study the Korean Ojibwe. Canada is an institutional, economic, and cultural failure in ways you cannot imagine. So yeah, with that digression aside, okay, what is the value of a university education? I am not going to idealize this, but we're going to talk about this in a practical, real world, feet on the ground, face-to-face reality sort of way. Okay, you tell me that you taught yourself to read Latin, and now you've read the whole of the book of Genesis in Latin. So this is presumably Jerome's Vulgate reading of Latin. How do you know you understood what you were reading correctly? Now, what most people will say is, oh, because I compared it to the English translation. Oh, what a rabbit hole to go down. And I mean, so many ships have been sunk on those rocky shoals. I mean, especially with religious literature. You have no idea how easily people can delude themselves about these things. Well, guess what? If you were going through the same text with a professor sort of looking over your shoulder and watching you, he is not just going to be drawing your attention to errors you make, misinterpretations you are making. He is going to be drawing your attention to errors the author of the Latin translation made, to issues and questions in the history of the translation that may be unresolved. There may be no solution to, like some particular passages. The real meaning is unknown. It's the Bible is neither the best nor the worst example of this. But anyway, you're already looking at a Latin translation that is intentionally beguiling you and misleading you as to how difficult the Hebrew and Greek really are as sources to work from. And then you're dealing with an English translation that is doubly beguiling and misleading towards you. And you're sitting there as a self-taught autodidact with nobody to correct you or challenge you, and really no way to check, no way to verify your own competence or incompetence, your own brilliance or stupidity. in reading or understanding any given sentence. Now, I just mentioned Latin is close enough to English that you can scrape by. You can guess the approximate meaning of the sentence you're working with. Again, just partly because of the resemblance to so many nouns and verbs that we have in English. That makes it easier to kid yourself. With a language like Chinese, it's a little bit of a different game. But yes, people do play mind games. People do really badly mislead themselves. And they convince themselves they've understood something, or even that they had a shockingly original insight into a text when they haven't. So if there is just one word in a sentence in Chinese that you don't know or you misapprehend, if there is one idiom, one piece of jargon, I mean, even with modern Chinese that you take the wrong way, if there is one word and you think it serves the function of a verb, and in fact it's the function of a noun, again, Chinese, from the perspective of a native speaker, doesn't have a distinction between verbs and nouns, you can get it entirely, totally, utterly wrong. Okay, but even just sticking with this one example. So an autodidact, someone completely alone, working on his own schedule, no university, no structure of authority, no grading of exams, no tests. Someone at leisure in a library teaches themselves Latin in 6 months and then reads the book of Genesis. Okay, you were not forced to work your way through a reading list of assigned readings, giving you contrasting views of scholars, of experts from different periods of time. Now, again, I'm saying I don't want to idealize the university process. What is the lower limit of intelligence for a human being to have a PhD and work in a university? Part of the problem we're dealing with in the English-speaking world is that, in a very real sense, there is no university system. There's nothing systematic about it. This is a bunch of eccentric aristocrats who do not answer to any standards from anyone. They get on stage and do whatever they think is appropriate, largely based on their own childhood experience of having once been a student themselves, their own fantasy of what they wanted to do when they were a professor one day. They're not held to any standard this way. But yes, in theory, what your professor should be doing is trying to make you familiar with the state of the art of current scholarship. Right now, I'll digress to say what I mean by scholarship, because there are some people in the audience who don't really know. Some people watching this are 16 years old, but you could be 26 or 36 and you have lived a life where you don't know what that means. Do you know what a literature review means? Anyway, it doesn't have anything to do with a review in the sense of a movie review, and it doesn't have anything to do with literature in the normal sense of the word literature either. So you may have been living your life outside of this kind of jargon. So what a professor is normally trying to do is give you a sense of what are the current controversies, what are the current debates in the leading edge literature, leading edge scholarship, and then to give you a contrasting awareness of perhaps several centuries, perhaps 300 years of earlier controversies. So we can use an example from hard political science very quickly, and then I can use an example that's more religious and philosophical, like Buddhism or what have you. This may seem laughable, but what happened with the alliance between Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler that defined a certain period of World War II and then dramatically broke down afterward? Well, you might say, come on, isn't this obvious? Like such a mainstream subject as in the 20th century. Okay, what happened in the middle of World War II with the sort of alliance between, and right down to the alliance between Stalin and Hitler? What were their objectives? Well, you would be surprised. We can talk about the current consensus view among experts and scholars, which, surprise, is based on documents, like primary source documents that were discovered quite recently. In some cases, the documents were actually secret. In some cases, they were just unknown. In some cases, it's like, oh, well, this document, some people knew about it in Russian, but it was only translated into English and started to influence Western English-speaking scholars. They were understanding what happened after this year at this point. So like step-by-step different pieces of evidence come out. But of course, the pendulum can sort of swing back the other way. Oh, yes, when this group of documents was suddenly unearthed or revealed, then that influenced everyone to view Stalin and Hitler this way. But, with the passage of time, people started to look at that in context and examine it this way. And now the pendulum has swung back, and really they think this was what was going on. So just to give you an example, this is still debated. This is really debated intensely. But one view, which is today very powerful, is that Stalin was planning to conquer as much of Western Europe as he could, that was really his plan, and that the alliance with Hitler and what he did, this comes down to like specific troop movements and tank placements and everything. And it comes down to, believe it or not, this is real evidence. He had deployed all these tanks, all these, mobile armored personnel carriers, munitions, these kind of things. He deployed these things that had wheels and treads that would only work on a highway. And this is evidence that they were not put there. They were not intended to defend against the Germans or fight against the Germans as the Germans pressed into Russia. They were meant to roll down highways to Germany and what have you. That was like, when you're looking at the plan, these were not meant to fight in the snow. They were not meant to fight in the mud. And this is what scholars get into. Okay, so what was Stalin's actual intention? Why did he make this agreement with Hitler? Why did this, and this happen? Why were these things going on? By the way, a specific one, you might be shocked that there really are mysteries about World War II. What was the strategy of the Spanish fascists, the Phalange? Which side were they on? Something as simple as that. What was the agreement between the Phalange and the British, and the Phalange and the Germans? I wrote a research paper on this when I was really a teenager. I think it was my very first few months at university. I think I was quite young. So not up to my current standards. But no, you would be amazed. Now, of course, partly this can be, as I say, actual discovery of documents that were previously unknown. But also when you have an ocean of documents, you have an ocean of evidence, right? People, if you think of someone in a canoe, canoeing through that ocean, you can kind of put your paddle down anywhere. You can be influenced by just this document, just these facts. When you select a few facts, a few points of data out of that, then you can present a seemingly very convincing case. This was what the Spanish were trying to do. This was what Joseph Stalin was trying to do. And then this is how that plan went wrong. This is how it changed. And someone else can say, oh, well, guess what? I have some evidence over here that completely changes the way you see this. So that's 20th century, everything written in modern languages. When you talk about what is meant by scholarship, this is what we mean, right? Something as simple as that, trying to establish what happened and why during World War II. The student, when you enroll in university, I don't want to idealize this. This should be, even in a first-year course, this should be your professor's agenda. The professor is trying to make you familiar with the primary source text, with the bare facts of history, kind of in their original context, with all the misapprehensions and misunderstandings and fog of war at the time. I mean, fog of war here, both literally and figuratively, And then he's trying to contrast that to the seeming certainty of one generation of scholars after another and one ideological camp of scholars being contrasted to another. So, oh, well, this group of researchers, this group of experts, they are completely certain that this is what happened historically and why. But, here's a different group, whether this different group is organized politically, they have a different political agenda, or it may just be geographically. This is the way French historians view it. This is the way Russian historians, this is the way the Japanese view it. Whatever, just in general, there's some cluster. It can just be random. There's a group of experts and historians or researchers who view it a certain way. And then what you start to say is, oh, okay, so there were all these different people in different historical periods who were completely certain, completely dogmatically convinced they knew what happened and why, and all of them are wrong. And my job today as a student is not just to read the primary source text, right? Not just not just to open up and read the Bible from beginning to end, or not just to read Plato's Republic from beginning to end. The works of Plato were also mentioned here. My job is to see my own struggle to understand these texts and their significance. Their significance in their own time, their significance for us who are alive today, and maybe their significance in several other periods in between. To understand that in the context of competing claims to certainty, all of which really are false. So yeah, I wasn't going to use Plato as an example, but Plato is a great example. So, hey guys, did you know that there is a Nazi interpretation of Plato? So I don't mean neo-Nazi. I mean the actual Nazis, the Germans during World War II. in the years before and World War II, obviously, in that period. Now just a little bit more broadly than just talking about Plato and Plato's Republic specifically, because that's an area of study, the Nazi interpretation of Plato. Sparta. Okay, so right now we've lived through another period when Sparta has become a kind of cultural symbol, certainly in the United States of America. A very good question for you. How do the Japanese regard Sparta today? How do the Chinese regard Sparta today? How do people in Greece, like modern Greece, people who are alive, how do they think of Sparta? Well, I can show you some Hollywood movies and show you exactly how Americans think about Sparta. I remember a newspaper article suggesting a survey of airbrushed paint jobs on the sides of conversion vans and pickup trucks involving Sparta. Because, I think the slogan, "We are Sparta," and the image of fighting Spartans could be seen at truck stops, could be seen in this way, among the hoi polloi. And, so I just say the significance of Sparta, historical reality. Well, look, the significance of Sparta in its own time, in ancient times, the significance of Sparta in early communism. So, let's just say during the life of Lenin, just to pick a period, but, look, the significance of Sparta during the life of Karl Marx, during that period, guess what? It's not just the Nazis. Guess who latched on to Sparta's symbol? The significance of Sparta in the British Empire, we'd have to pick a date. 1850 in the British Empire. Pick a point in time. It can't be the whole history of the British Empire. Okay, so now this is what university trains you to do. And I'm just being real with you. If you're at a terrible university with terrible professors, this is still what you should be trying to get out of university, despite the fact that you got lousy professors. No, I could repeal this thing. I use Sparta as an example. Obviously, the exact same thing could be said about Plato, the author general, or Plato's Republic specifically. How was Plato's Republic read in a Nazi context, in a communist context? Different periods of the British Empire. What was the significance of Plato's Republic in the British conquering India and then ruling it? What was the utopian ideal in British colonies in India? But again, there are yet more voices and perspectives. You look at the history of Plato's Republic. The first time it was translated into Japanese. The first time it was translated into Chinese and how they respond to it. Also a very interesting history. How was Plato's Republic received in Arabic? And how still today? How is it perceived today in any Muslim majority country? These are really interesting and contested questions. But yes, the simplest question imaginable of, do you understand what happened and why? Do you understand the primary source text for something like Plato? Do you understand the primary source text for the book of Genesis in the Bible? Really? This is already a considerable hurdle to get over. And then do you understand the different ways in which, a diversity of voices in different periods, different ideological camps, the ways in which they've utterly misunderstood the text, misrepresented the text, and have become deeply committed to their own interpretation. They've begun to believe in the meaning they've ascribed to the text, very often contrary to the intention of the original author. So we've got a question from the audience. Someone named Lish writes in, quote, "Talk about Israel and Palestine. Too easy. Too easy." I continue, quote, "You're literally the only one who spoke out on the reality of what is happening in Xinjiang. If not, I would not have known the truth as well. You are spot on almost everything so far." So, look, I don't know anything about this person. As far as I know, we've never met and spoken. But you are showing a high level of intelligence in linking the question of what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine to the videos I made in the past on Xinjiang. And I will tell you, when I made those videos on YouTube, they were blacklisted and censored, and I got notifications and warnings from YouTube about that. So that's significant in its own way. I did not have the freedom of speech to talk about the reality of what was happening with these re-education camps in Xinjiang and the misinformation surrounding it. Now, again, YouTube is less a conspiracy than it is a confederacy of dunces. I'm sure that is mostly just out of stupidity and laziness. You may or may not know this anecdote, but at one point, I was very seriously punished by YouTube for racism in complaining that people in France don't wash their hands. This includes people working in restaurants, handling the food you're about to eat. It includes medical doctors handling my wife's vagina. Your mind is blown. You guys don't seem to have this concept of hand washing. So that was racist and was censored accordingly. And I wrote into them saying, look, look, some of my best friends are French, okay? I mean, so what if I'm a little bit racist against the French? Come on! So anyway, the issue of what really happened in Xinjiang is far outside the Overton window. It is possible. I'm the only English-speaking person on YouTube or something who dealt with that. And sadly, there's a long list of those issues. Obviously, one of the first that comes to mind from is Central Park 5. So if you have not heard of the Central Park 5, that is one of the more horrifying examples of an issue where I was the only one who told the truth about it. I'd like to think pretty much everything within the vegan movement, I'm the one who told the truth. Okay, what is the link between this question of the current war or civil war in the Gaza Strip, Israel and Palestine, and Xinjiang? Very simply, we need to be willing to ask ourselves the question, how much more moral, how much more ethical, how much preferable in its means, in its motivations, and in its outcomes is the policy China has had with forced education in Xinjiang to the policy that, basically the United Nations has had in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank and so on, parcel by parcel. You have to deal with this question. So, you're just going to contrast this really quickly. The other day, I drew up a map of the Oslo Accord zones. So if you don't know what this means, don't worry. This is basically a map showing the different zones that at one point Israel and the Palestinian Authority were negotiating, to what extent they would have the right to police themselves. The Palestinians would have their own police force and their own kind of civil and political authority that would be elected. And the map, you might think, oh, that's very simple. It probably looks like two big squares. Nope. It's a whole bunch of little strangely shaped circles, kind of zone by zone, how much political independence would be permitted for the Palestinian people. Now, I just mentioned I am rather hostile towards this approach to politics. But challenging myself and challenging Melissa was the only person there to hear this. I said, look, this looks bad, but guess what? We never did this for the Cree. We never did this for the Ojibwe. We never did this for the Mohawks. We never did this for the Inuit. We never did this to the indigenous people of North America, nor did, the government of Australia for the indigenous people of Australia. As messed up as this map might look, the reality is, within the last 100 years, we have never had to worry about the indigenous people here stockpiling missiles and firing them at us. It's just ludicrous. There's no concern. Oh, well, what if you allow the Cree and Ojibwe to have their own local police force and their own local elections? Do you think they're going to stockpile missiles and start massacring all the white people? Again, so this is now 2023. So 1923 to 2023, if we just look at that period of 100 years, no, there was no concern. I mean, already in 1923, there was really no concern of this kind whatsoever. And as bad and menacing and occasionally violent as the relationship between white people and the indigenous population may be, there's no comparison to what you see unfolding right now in the Gaza Strip. So yeah, I just said this to challenge myself, because I'm really not fond of what Israel's policy in the West Bank has been. This business of sort of pretending that this is a separate Muslim majority political principality of some kind, but at the same time, you are literally building these so-called settlements, really building whole cities, and it's a very, very strange dance they've engaged in. I mean, is this a province of Israel or not? And then what are you going to commit to, and what are the I really, really dislike what Israel has done that way in the West Bank. So I just say, you guys might not guess that about me, but I am Israel's harshest critic in that respect. Ultimately, there's got to be a line on the map for where Israel starts and stops. And certainly the West Bank, Israel has been very reluctant to commit to drawing such a line anywhere and then living by it. But look, this question of Xinjiang, these exactly the same method of forced re-education camps. Well, you know what? That's a lot better than what we did to the Cree and the Ojibwe too. What the Chinese did in Xinjiang in handling Muslim extremists That's so much better than what we in Canada did to our Indigenous people, what the people did in the United States to their Indigenous people, whichever example you want to choose. So yeah, in many ways, it's a very humbling sort of best case scenario for, forcing a violent religious minority to come back into what I guess we just call the Overton window, come back into the moderate center of what's acceptable politically, culturally, and in every other way. So yeah, Xinjiang has been falsely presented as the Western world to the Western world. It's been misrepresented by the Western world to the Western world as morally equivalent to Adolf Hitler carrying out the Holocaust. And what I am saying is that instead, the forced re-education camps in Xinjiang should be studied as an alternative to genocidal policies like those undertaken by Adolf Hitler and like those undertaken by the British Empire in Canada, in Australia, so on and so forth. Yeah. So Lish comments that they can see both of the videos up. Good. Yeah. Nothing further about that, really. Whew. Thank you for derailing this video. The ultimate reason for having coercive government policy against religious minorities is the importance of human potential. There are people being raised in ridiculous cult groups, whether they be Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or otherwise, and their potential is being snuffed out because of the stupidity of their own parents, because of brainwashing and what have you. And, I'm sorry, but even looking at the Haredi Jewish schools, like within Judaism, children that are raised, to not believe in evolution and to have really no practical job skills, no understanding of the modern world, economically, politically, otherwise, raised in this ridiculous kind of religious chicken coop. Of course, with every religion, I think religious education should be illegal, and that members of all of these religions should be forced, their children should be on a compulsory basis forced to have modern education. Now, I use the term there, religious minority. Guess what? That's also how I feel about the religious majority. And how are you going to accomplish that within the next 50 years? How are you going to accomplish it within Iran? How are you going to accomplish it within Afghanistan? How are you going to accomplish it within Canada, within Saskatchewan, so on and so forth? It's probably going to look a lot like Xinjiang. That's the fucking truth. It's probably going to look a lot like that. I am myself a victim of circumcision, this barbaric ritual from the Dark Ages. Neither Jews nor Muslims will easily give up the custom of circumcision. And it's a great example because it is something done to infants and young children against their will, without their informed consent. There's no way a newborn baby or even a young child can possibly know what's happening here. And scientifically and morally and ethically, it's totally unjust. So no, that what I'm proposing here, it's actually based on a fundamental commitment to human potential. What is for your own good? What is for the good of someone who is born into a Mormon cult today, a Buddhist cult? You can take your pick. If your parents have to remember this, what is for your own good as an individual? But when you scale it up, when you look at the Gaza Strip, what if the United Nations had refused to fund Muslim education? What if the United Nations and all foreign observers, and of course the Israelis too, had absolutely refused to have children being raised with a Hamas curriculum, with a Muslim fundamentalist curriculum? What if instead these kids had the same curriculum, the same type of education as the most secular, liberal, modern education in New York City, or dare I say, Beijing, China? what if they were learning about math and science and democracy and the history of the world what if they were really developing a sophisticated political and economic understanding of the world? And hey, natural sciences too. I don't have anything against chemistry and physics. I just don't think it matters as much to people's lives. But the theory of evolution and the reality of human sexuality, the reality of abortion and pregnancy and all the rest. Oh, do you think over the last 50 years, do you think that would have had a minor effect, a small difference on the history of the Gaza Strip and the Israel-Palestine conflict? No, there's no way to exaggerate the different position we'd be in today if the people of Palestine, the people of the West Bank, and the people of the Gaza Strip, if they'd had a world-class modern secular education instead of being inculcated into the religious schools and political propaganda that they were from birth, again and again, generation after generation. And look, obviously, I am much more sympathetic to the Cree and Ojibwe, the Mohawk, the Navajo, the indigenous people of North America, than I am to, frankly, the Hamas-supporting denizens of the Gaza Strip. But my sympathy is irrelevant here. If you really know and care about the history of the indigenous people of Canada, they also needed access to a modern world-class education so they could be part of the modern world. It's not the case that what they needed was to be left alone, but it's also the case that what they did not need was being forced into Christian cult education to be destroyed by being forcibly assimilated into the worst aspects of our own religion out of the Dark Ages. So why end of digression from that. So anyway, Lish, thanks for your question. I'm going to ask you a favor. Share the link to this video with anyone you know who cares. You probably know 5 people who care. So yeah. Okay. A university education challenges you in this way to develop a comparative and analytic awareness of how a given text was understood in its own time, how it is understood today, and how this sort of strange class of people called scholars, researchers, and experts, how they have contested its significance. You are forced to present your own understanding of the text, your own criticism of the text, whatever it may be. You're forced to present that in the context of the cacophony of those voices, the contrasting opinions and perspectives of, again, this is how French anthropologists see it use the text. This is how Japanese scholars use the text. This is how, maybe it's just one particular scholar in Germany at one time who's influential, but maybe it's a whole school of thought. Maybe it's a political category. This is how communists interpreted the text, so on and so forth. Geographically contrasting views, politically contrasting views, so on and so forth. Now, your professor may be so pathetic and so stupid and so lazy that when you're in the middle of the situation, you can't see the point. You can't see the benefit. You think, why shouldn't I just drop out of school and independently, for example, read the complete works of Plato, complete extant works, or the complete works of Aristotle from cover to cover? Now, I actually do think the problem I'm about to describe, I think it's the same when you're reading something where the first language is English and when it's been translated into English from another language. I do think this is the same problem, whether we're talking about Chinese sources translated in English or original Chinese. I actually do. But obviously, it's a bit more daunting, especially when you're still a teenager, when you have the miasma of translation in between you and the primary source text. And I'm sorry, I'm here discussing text. It's very unlikely your university education consists of anything other than text, unless you're studying music. If you want to know the role of corruption and bribery in the election of JFK, in the university context, you encounter that as text, right? But in a sense, it's not text that you're studying. It's particular events, particular opinions. And there are still people alive today. You could actually learn about that by interviewing people, doing a sort of ethnography, if you like. participant observation and even investigation and research. But we are almost always in the university system talking about text, so I am jumping to the chase. If you work in archaeology, maybe you actually deal with physical objects, the interpretation of a physically real object instead of a text written about the object. Even so, it'll almost entirely be the text that your mind and work and research is directed towards. Yeah, so a perfectly good question from the audience. Quote, why are you not more interested in physics? Quantum physics shows that the world fundamentally is not as we think, and that not even causality as a concept is true. Okay, so another kind of interesting digression. Do you know anyone who decided to stop beating his wife because of physics? Do you know anyone who fundamentally changed his position on slavery, genocide, the treatment of Black and Indigenous First Nations people because of physics? Why do you think that is, bro? The meaninglessness of physics, its lack of relevance to how we live our lives and the difference we try to make in the world. I would compare to toothpaste. Now, I care a lot about toothpaste. I care a lot about dental hygiene. Topic for another video. I do. But for the whole of the 20th century, I would say, there was a prevailing misconception that as soon as the people of Afghanistan started brushing their teeth with toothpaste, as soon as the poverty-stricken, benighted, ignorant peoples of the world, as soon as they started to have access to these technologies, whether it was the lowly tube of toothpaste or the lofty atom bomb, that this would shock them into more scientific, more modern, more meaningful philosophy of life and view of the world, that the darkness of the Dark Ages would wither away. And that is not true. What happened in Afghanistan and what's happened in North Korea and all kinds of terrible places around the world, you used to have religious maniacs who were illiterate, and now you have religious maniacs who are texting each other on a cell phone. You used to have religious maniacs whose teeth fell out and had no access to dental hygiene and toothpaste, and now they have toothpaste. So yes, there is in fact a chapter of my book dealing with this. The chapter of Future of an Illusion, full title Veganism, Future of an Illusion, that deals with the way in which we falsely ascribe political and philosophical significance to technology, technological change, and science, and scientific change and scientific progress. So no, I hate to tell you this. I don't even believe that nutritional science will lead you to become vegan. I don't even think there's a connection there. And you can look around. It's not as if there are scientific facts lacking about the harm done by cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. I don't think there is any scientific discovery, whether under the heading of chemistry, physics, nutritional science, or what have you, that is going to bring about the change I care about in relation to recreational addictive drugs, cocaine, etc., marijuana even. It's ridiculous. Do you think there's a lack of evidence that marijuana causes brain damage? Guess again. Nor in relation to a vegan diet, nor in relation to any of the ethical and political questions of our time. So yes, the philosophic vacuity of the study of physics is a bit painful to endure. And look, credit where it's due. I am the world's harshest critic of Buddhism. Buddhist philosophy has all of these effects on people. You will meet people who start studying the philosophy of Buddhism and they decide to stop beating their wives. They decide to stop beating their children. They decide to stop eating meat. They decide to start taking responsibility for and caring about all kinds of things in the world. There's no connection between Buddhism and ecology. None. But people study the philosophy of Buddhism and they start caring about ecology and other things too. And obviously it's going to change your political perspective on Afghanistan, shall we say. So, I mean, again, credit where it's due. There's a lot wrong with Buddhism, but actually its salience to how we live, what we do in this world is an instructive contrast to physics. Although I realize there are books like The Tao of Physics that exactly try to merge the two and make money out of it. Okay, this digression may seem totally irrelevant to the topic of today's video, but it probably is relevant. A part of the university experience, no doubt, is being forced to read things you don't want to read and forced to learn things you don't want to learn, things you wouldn't encounter on your own. And that can include being forced to take an intro to physics course. And it can be, dealing with the sort of questions you're talking about. That also can lead to very positive things in your life, where you simply gain perspectives you otherwise wouldn't have if you are taking your university courses seriously and not dragging your ass and doing the bare minimum. Okay, so look, a large part of my critique of the university system is directed towards the system part of the phrase. Now, why is that? Because the systematic problems are likely to be the same for you and you and you in the audience. But in this video, implicitly, most of what I've been saying, both positively and negatively, has not been about the system. It has been about particular people within the system. And I have to tell you, when we talk about education, if you think of it as a relationship between two people, master and pupil, most of what's valuable and important here has nothing to do with the system. It has nothing to do with any system. It's not a problem with the system. It's a problem with the person. And the best system imaginable, hypothetically, if it employs bad people, will nevertheless result in bad education and bad outcomes. You cannot have good university education because of the quality of the brickwork of the university. There are the systematic elements, the systematic problems of education, ultimately are sort of dwarfed by the enormity of the difficulty of simply having good, intelligent, well-intentioned people, genuinely helpful people who are genuinely trying to help you as a pupil in the role of master, in the role of professor, in the role of tutor, so on and so forth. Now, obviously, I've written an enormous book about this called No More Manifestos. There is an extent to which you can criticize the police system, the system of policing, and we get into the critique of police education, in that book, right? But then again, ultimately, at some point, we have to acknowledge even the best police system in the world will fail, will have terrible outcomes, if simply there are bad people, bad individual men within that system. And we get into really a question of the virtue of the individual people involved. What is the value of working to someone else's schedule, to saying, I have to produce this analysis, this opinion in the format the professor requires, working with, as I say, this cacophony of contrasting voices. I have to show that my opinion makes sense given several successive waves, several generations of scholars who've competed over and contested what the meaning of this text should be and what matters about it in the world today. What Plato's Republic, what does it mean today? What does it matter today? And again, maybe what did it matter in Nazi Germany and what did it matter in communist Russia? These kinds of contrasting questions. There is something tremendously fundamentally valuable about being forced out of your own comfort zone, being forced to read and survey the literature, this cacophony of contrasting voices, and to situate your own experience, your perspective, and to fight for your interpretation, to fight for what you think is important and what matters here in that context. And the good news is you can do that all alone with nothing but a library card and your own keyboard. Most of that learning process, if you understand it, if you care about it passionately, it actually doesn't require the university professor to be a particularly brilliant or well-intentioned person. Now, sadly, I've made other videos talking about just one bad professor can ruin your life, which is tragic. And it's happened to me repeatedly. Just one bad person, they have power over you, and their power is much greater than just grading your essays and papers. That's simply not the topic of this video today. But yeah, the good news I want to deliver in this video is that the value of university education, if you go into that context, understanding it yourself. Understanding that even if this is a stupid assignment from a stupid professor about a stupid subject, that actually there is something for me to learn. And there's a way in which I can develop positively by researching and writing a really great essay this way. Now, yeah, my personal tragedy in life, it's already been covered at the very beginning of this video in a haphazard way. I wanted to study and become a scholar and become an expert in a series of fields, and that was just not possible because I'm a prisoner of my passport. There was no university in Canada, and I looked at universities all over the world, Taiwan, America, so on. There was an institutional constraint where I could not study when I wanted to study. I could not advance in my career. Again, there's also the issue of the evil of particular individual people within academia and the stupidity of people. That has also ruined my life, sadly. So I wasn't able to do any of the things I wanted to do. That's my tragedy. There's a second kind of constraint, which is simply whether or not that cacophony of sources exists, whether there already is a literature for you to work within on any given subject. So just mention briefly an example of me taking a meaningless university course and making it meaningful. I did a lot of research on the political history of Sakhalin Island. So this is an island that is straight north of Japan. It's part of the Japanese island chain, but is today occupied by Vladimir Putin's Russia. So, the course being taught had nothing to do with this. The assignment was bullshit. Professor's attitude is bullshit. There was nothing good about the situation, but it's, that's my risk. Okay, I am going to make this the most meaningful research project of my life, and me just working alone with my library card. Well, I don't read Russian. I don't read Japanese. I'm like level 1 Japanese or something. Well, maybe I'm level 2, but whatever. I can't read primary sources in Japanese or Russian. You might be surprised that there are very few books, very few academic articles about the history of Sakhalin Island, and that's something young people need to be made aware of. You need to be aware of the scarcity of institutional options, and then the scarcity of that existing literature. But I'm just being honest with you, this is one of the main reasons to work on a subject like Plato's Republic, or something that's heavily studied when you are a young person, or again, even if you're 20s, 30s, 40s. If you're just someone who hasn't built up this set of this academic skill set, this set of tricks, this set of habits, this set of skills. Someone might ask the question, and when I was a teenager, I asked this question: why should I study Plato? Why should I study Plato's Republic when so many other people have already studied it? When so many other people have already written an essay of exactly this kind? I am being given an assignment. It's a question about Plato's Republic. How many thousand people have read this same book and done the same project and written the same essay? What's the point? And, again, as a teenager and still now as an adult, to some extent, I instead wanted to be on the frontiers of knowledge. No, like when I was studying Buddhism, I want to deal with Buddhism in Cambodia. I want to deal with the hardest to study, most, so, this issue of frontiersmanship, where you're pushing at your own limits, you're pushing at the frontiers of scholarship, of knowledge. That was an instinct that was very strong in me as a young man. And I don't want to repeat someone else's work. Someone somewhere has already written exactly the same essay on Plato's Republic. But what I can appreciate now as an old man with gray hairs in his beard is no, for the vast majority of people, the vast majority of time, that's exactly what you want to work within. Because what you do is cultivate this habit of mind, you cultivate this side of your character of understanding your own opinion, your own feelings, because partly it's an emotional response, not an intellectual response. A response to what? Response to a text, response to historical events, response to a political problem, response, in theory, to archaeology, whatever it is you're studying. Okay, I am reacting to this intellectually. I am reacting to this emotionally. This is what I think, this is what I feel. And this is now the message or thesis I want to put out in the world. This is the conclusion I want to advance. And you cultivate that quality of character of really understanding yourself, not just understanding the text, not just understanding Plato's Republic in its historical context, but I understand myself as a product of my own century, of my own circumstances, the circumstances of living, the intellectual influences that shape me. I understand my own moral assumptions. I'm reading a book at the moment. Oh, I have it right here. I'm reading yet another book on the life of George Washington, terrible book, by the way, very poorly written, don't recommend it, but I'm forcing myself through this book. Obviously what slavery means to me, what genocide means to me, what racism means to me is not what it meant for George Washington. So I have this response to the biography of George Washington, the political history of what happened in the life of George Washington, its significance in the United States and for the whole world. But you develop that quality of character where instead of, frankly, being an ignorant teenage moron who just gets on Twitter or gets on Instagram and says, this is right, this is wrong, and I'm morally pure and I'm factually correct, I know better than everyone else. This is the tragedy of human nature. Ignorance is always new. With every generation, these traits emerge again and again. The brittle moral superiority of youth, and obviously, if we're talking about George Washington, of course you feel like you're morally superior to George Washington. You are. Of course you think you know better than George Washington. You do. That's actually not what I'm finding fault with. But where instead you can look at George Washington or you can look at Plato's Republic and you can articulate your own view in a sophisticated way that draws on and where you contrast yourself to all of these different voices, all of these different scholars, all of these different sets of cultural assumptions, ethical assumptions, moral assumptions, all these different political agendas, and where you gain that self-knowledge, where you say, look, this is my political agenda. This is my analysis. And, inevitably, there will be a process of discovery again and again and again that you yourself have been wrong. We don't learn by making mistakes, but we learn by noticing them. Now, if you just teach yourself Latin, if you just teach yourself Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, if you just teach yourself language alone, no teacher, do you notice your mistakes? Is it even possible? Again, a text like the Bible, how would you even know that actually this sentence is incomprehensible? No matter what your interpretation is wrong, it's a sense where it's a proven fact. Nobody knows what this means. Like the actual text is corrupt or something. You don't learn by making the mistake. You learn by having it pointed out to you, noticing it, studying it. Okay, now I see where I was wrong. Again, that could be a professor who helps you. It could, in some circumstances, it could be you discover your mistakes yourself. But what university gives you above all else, right, is this comparative awareness of the errors of all the people who came before. That's why it's worthwhile for you to study something like Plato's Republic. How many thousands of essays have moved this? How many thousands of theses have moved this? Well, I do research on something like Sakhalin Island. Something so little has been published about politics of Sakhalin Island versus politics of Plato's Republic or politics of George Washington. Okay. Especially as a young person or as a relatively naive middle-aged person, right? The tremendous positive value of university education is learning to situate yourself, define yourself, contradistinguish yourself to that cacophony of competing voices. And the greatest power of all is this, that the road to nihilism comes out of the realization that each one of these successive waves of scholars, they felt dogmatically certain in their own truth. And just as you have made mistakes and discovered that you were wrong, each and every one of those scholars, of those experts, they also were wrong. You come to the discovery, the deep understanding that behind all authority is mere authorship, and that you stand on the same level as the author of this book. You stand on the same level as the authors even of the Bible or the Buddhist scripture, that in your own time and in your way too, you are an author yourself.